So, for those who don't know, Richard Dawkins has declared himself a cultural Christian, and people are rightfully skeptical on why. And that is because in his statement, at least the one that I've read in an article that I will have linked in the description, he seems to be more focused on the laws and keeping the Christian nationalist type of Christianity in the world, in his home country of the UK, more so than he is focused on the actual aspect of going to church and reading the Bible and whatever. I will say the not believing Jesus has supernatural powers is not a new thing. Deism has been a thing since I remember at least learning about it in my high school history class, about that not all of the founding fathers were what we'd think of today as Christian. A lot of them, or a few of them at least, were deists, like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, and they were essentially they didn't believe that Jesus had supernatural powers. I'm not entirely sure if they believed that there was a God. Also, in paganism, there is a concept called atheopagan, where a person is someone who partakes in pagan rituals, but does not, what is the word I'm looking for? They don't believe the gods are real. Some atheopagans have what I consider to be kind of personally a little weird idea of squishing the gods into these archetype things. That's a bit confusing and weird to me, no offense. Obviously you're not hurting anyone, just in my opinion, I think it's a little weird. But y'all aren't here to hear a Christo-pagan talk about atheopaganism and atheism and all of that. You're probably wondering, you haven't talked about Christo-paganism in a while. Are you still a Christo-pagan? And the answer is yes. And also, the answer to why I'm talking about this, since, it's not like Dawkins is converting to Christo-paganism, so what does this got to do with me? It has to do with the fact that cultural Christianity in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, but the reasons he's doing it are the problem. In his statements that are featured in the article, he's essentially focused more on just being Islamophobic and transphobic and upholding the quote-unquote Christian nation or whatever, more so than he is the what's what I'm looking for, the actual laws. He cares more about using Christianity as a weapon against groups he dislikes than he does about actually participating in the Christian rituals of communion, reading the Bible, which singing songs. If you like Christian music and you like to sing along with it, but you're an atheist, more power to you. That's cool. I think being an atheist and partaking in religion isn't a bad thing, as long as it's done for the right reasons. And I just don't think he's doing it for the right reasons. And even though my situation isn't exactly the same as his, as far as I'm the opposite. I go to church because I do believe in Jesus. I don't remember if what opinions I had on this in the past, but currently I view the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as very different beings. But anyway, I digress. I take a more polytheistic view of the Trinity than I do a monotheistic one at this point. But I also do go to a run-of-the-mill standard church. And I am LGBT, very much in the closet though. And I go to church kind of partially because it makes it easier to hide, to be closeted, to like hide. And I do, I do also really like the rituals of like communion and singing, songs to Jesus and stuff like that. And I do worship Jesus. I don't worship any of the other parts of the Trinity because I don't really vibe with the other ones. But also there's a lot of like varying experience amongst churches and amongst Christians of what God is like and all that, and it seems like it somewhat depends on what name they use, which is kind of my, I guess, evidence for it being polytheistic in a way. But either way, Dawkins isn't really like the evangelical Christians are having none of it, and it's funny because it's not for the reason you'd hope. Like you'd hope the reason that they don't want him in their group is because he's bigoted AF. But no, the reason they don't want him in their group is because he doesn't agree with them on like God and that type of thing. So like that's unfortunate. But it's like that's like really unfortunate that. But it's also not surprising to me because when I was in the like Christian conspiracy side of the internet for a while, I wasn't like hardcore into it, but it was just more like, oh, these people are talking about the end times. Sure, they might be exaggerating some stuff for like clout and stuff, like saying, oh, they know for sure that this celebrity isn't a Christian or whatever. Like, there did seem to be some of that aspect of it. But I'm like, oh, well, they're talking about the end times, and I find that both fascinating and terrifying. And at the time, I was like very worried that like we didn't have much time left before the world ends. But anyway, I've gotten out of that now. I don't think, I don't know. I think I found it reassuring that like, okay, God's gonna come back soon. Well, now I find it terrifying. Like the concept, and the idea that anyone can find that anything other than terrifying is mind-boggling to me. But anyway, I'm very much glad to be on this planet and that God hasn't come back, and I don't necessarily know if he will, at least not in the way it's written in the Bible. I think humans need to take responsibility for climate change and stuff instead of putting that responsibility on God. Because I feel like that's all people are doing lately with the end time stuff, is just putting that responsibility on God instead of taking responsibility for their own actions and how they impact the planet. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I mean, I use, paper napkins and stuff like that, and there's no ethical consumption under capitalism and all that, but I think there's a lot of people that do kind of use the end times thing as a coping mechanism for the fact that the climate's changing, and instead of dealing with that reality, they kind of go, oh, God's coming back soon. But anyway, I'm kind of going on some tangents. This is going to be an unedited rant because, I don't know, I just want it to be an unedited rant. Like, I just want to do that style of, like, it's an edited video, but also it's kind of like a live stream. But anyway, so, like, part of me feels like I can't really judge Dawkins too much because it's like, I go to church. And not necessarily always because I agree with everything in it. But the difference is, I agree with the ritual aspect of it, and also, I don't know, don't want to give up my routine, and don't want to, give up the time with my grandparents that I get by going to church. But I mean, there's also the, like, fear that they're going to disown me if they find out I'm LGBT, but anyway, that's beside the point. Dawkins, essentially, is focused on the opposite of that. He's focused on the legal side of things, the Christianity being in the laws, things like that. That is honestly terrifying. I'm kind of glad that the evangelical Christians aren't accepting him, even if it is for the wrong reasons. But I'm just... Can people stop using religion as a means to be bigoted? Like, the fact that it is kind of mainstream for Christianity to be bigoted, and it's the minority of Christians or like I can't think of the word. Like, that it's a minority that are not bigoted. And I think a lot of it comes down to, a lot of times, unless you are part of one of those minority groups, you don't tend to question things. You tend to feel like, well, everything's working out, so you don't tend to question things. And then when it's you, then you all of a sudden, do a lot of researching and questioning and looking into things. And also, I think the fact that a lot of the people that are not bigoted Christians are essentially the ones in the minority groups that Christianity doesn't like. It makes it harder to stand up for your rights and for the rights of those around you when you yourself are essentially a target for this group. And I don't think that gets talked about enough either. So the fact that someone is literally bold enough to convert to Christianity to be bigoted is, I don't know, I feel like it's a sign of where we're at in society, both like as a whole and like as like the collective Christian kind of group, as far as like, nobody's condemning him for his bigotry other than a lot of non-Christians. And honestly, I kind of wish there was more Christian allyship to like the LGBT community from other Christians, rather than it not just being performative either, like genuine, actually, actual support, not just this weird conditional shit that you see with like the Catholic Church and with some evangelical churches, or even non-denominational churches, where they're like, okay, we'll accept you, but also we still think you're wrong and you can't serve in our congregations, or, there's a lot of these stipulations kind of depending on which church we're talking about. It is just beyond frustrating. It is so frustrating that, like, the bigotry has been normalized to a point where it's almost impossible to, like, fight it or do anything about it. You just kind of have to fucking live with it because there's nothing else you can fucking do. I don't know, maybe I'm being doomer in this last part of this video. Maybe I'm becoming a fucking doomer. I don't know. I find it so frustrating. I find it so frustrating that, like, we can't have more Christians genuinely calling this shit out. But yeah, anyway, I'll put the article in the description if y'all want to read it. Hope y'all have a good day, and thanks for watching.